June 17, 1920 was a day of excitement. More than 500 residents of Princeton and the surrounding countryside were making their way by horse, by car, or by foot to visit the newest building on Park Avenue. After almost 2 years of delays, the doors of Perry Memorial Hospital were finally opening, and people were clamoring to get their first looks at the inside. Less than 20 employees, mostly nurses, were hired to run the hospital, and the list of services offered could fit on one side of a small piece of paper. The prices were just as simple. For many of Bureau County's older residents, the idea of a hospital was strange. Only 50 years before, a mere handful of hospitals existed in Illinois. Now, Perry Memorial Hospital was joining the ranks of more than 200 hospitals across the state. Like many others, it had been a long journey to get to this point, and the road ahead would be filled with unexpected challenges. Princeton, first known as Greenfield, had been founded in 1831. An influx of settlers came from New England and Europe to cultivate the land and build a new life for their families. After the Civil War, industry, especially coal mining, attracted even more people to the area.
After the railroads arrived in the 1850s, we started to see the influx of industry into the area. After about 1860, we see coal mining pick up and become the second major industry in the county after agriculture.
Throughout the 1800s, settlers of Bureau County had to brave the frontier without a hospital. Farming, mining, and manufacturing were physically demanding jobs. Every scratch along the way brought a risk of infection and death. When someone fell sick, their family had two choices: travel by horse or by foot in hopes of finding a doctor, or try home remedies.
There were just traveling doctors. A few would have private practices and offices on main streets, but most of it was the typical house calls. And so beginning with the telephone service in the 1890s, that made it a lot easier to call for a doctor, and the emergency response time started to improve. It was one of the great technologies in healthcare.
By the late 1800s, Bureau County was home to dozens of well-trained physicians, in addition to frequent visits from traveling doctors. Doctors often advertised remedies that were guaranteed to cure every problem. Physicians primarily treated patients in their offices, but sometimes would travel for miles to treat patients in their own homes.
All the doctors were their own pharmacists as well, so the doctors at the time were compounding and creating their own medicines.
At times, doctors would convert rooms in their own homes to house ill patients. Without a hospital, there was nowhere else for the sick and injured to receive supervised care.
Diphtheria, whooping cough, things that we have vaccines for now, were common killers, and of course smallpox still circulated up until the early 20th century as well. So the plague diseases, or the transmissible bacterial infections, were common, and they would pop up and get in water supplies or travel through food supplies. And then you would see outbreaks of things like cholera or diphtheria. And so the doctors had limited antibacterial type or antibiotic remedies at that point.
Around the 1880s, advances in medicine uncovered the importance of sterilization and opened up a whole new world for surgeons. They needed a controlled, sterile space for surgeries. By the early 1900s, public and private hospitals were springing up all across the country and changing the landscape of healthcare. For Princeton, the first opportunity for a hospital would come when two brothers, Homer and Lee Hickman, purchased a home on Park Avenue East in 1902. The brothers were both osteopathic physicians, specializing in surgery and X-ray equipment. Together, the Hickman brothers spent nearly $20,000 converting their new property into a private hospital, filled with expensive, state-of-the-art equipment. Area physicians in good standing were encouraged to bring their patients to the hospital for supervised care. Through the hospital, doctors could count on skilled nurses to be ready at a moment's notice to help with the treatment of any patients. The Princeton Sanatorium and Surgical Hospital opened in February of 1903. The new electrical plant in Princeton made it possible to power the X-ray machine and fans throughout the house.
The sick, the wounded, and crippled can receive all the care and attention and have all the advantages of modern medical, surgical, and sanitary science under the care of skilled physicians and trained nurses, with the additional advantages of pure country air combined with quiet, restful, refreshing, and beautiful surroundings.
Ultimately, the brothers could not sustain the hospital. During their first year of operation, they were encumbered by personal illness and the financial burdens of their investments. On top of that, local physicians and the community overall did not provide the support they had expected. Only 25 patients were ever admitted to the hospital. 7 of them died. The Princeton Sanitarium and Surgical Hospital closed on July 1st, 1904. In the years that followed, the hospital changed hands several times. Dr. Matthew Blackburn was the next to own and operate the Princeton Hospital. Dr. Blackburn was a long-time Bureau County physician and a prominent member of the Bureau County Medical Society. He oversaw the hospital successfully for 3 years, admitting and treating 252 patients and performing 172 surgeries over that time. After Dr. Blackburn closed the hospital in 1908, Princeton was once again without a hospital. By this time, area physicians had grown accustomed to the advantages of having a local hospital.
Other physicians of the city have seen the need of a well-equipped hospital here, and the benefits and advantages it would be to the community.
In 1909, the city of Princeton attempted to reopen the hospital using public funding. It was the first of several failed attempts to use taxes to support the hospital.
Public utilities and government-run facilities wasn't a thing at that point. Everything was private business. Insurance was private, and there was no such thing as medical insurance. All the doctors were paid ahead or paid in kind with barter systems, and that you've heard of people who paid their doctors with chickens and things like that.
In 1910, Miss Pearl T. Cox of Chicago purchased the hospital and reopened it for care.
No pains will be spared to give first-class service in the Princeton Hospital, both in medical and surgical lines. If I can have the sympathetic support of this community, there is no reason why the Princeton Hospital may not become a credit to the city, as well as a great convenience to those who stand in need of hospital services.
Community support would indeed be needed. In 1911, a case of smallpox broke out in the hospital. By the end, 2 nurses died from smallpox, and the Princeton Hospital went for months without income. Local businessmen began an effort to sustain the hospital with donations through the quarantine. It would not be enough. In the spring of 1912, the Princeton Hospital closed once and for all. The need for a hospital still existed. The discovery of germs and the danger of infection was propelling the need for hospitals across the country. Once again, the city of Princeton developed a plan to reopen the hospital by levying a new tax. The referendum was defeated in 1912. Another vote in 1914 also fell short.
During the 1910s to 20 era, you had World War I happening, as early as 1913, 1914. And so people in Princeton were aware of the global conflict and aware of the fact that that was going to cost the U.S. taxpayer a lot of money. And so going into that, people never want to pay more taxes. And so in an era where they were facing the possibility of a draft and of having to spend a lot of the United States resources on World War I think that was a major detractor for people wanting to vote to increase or pay a levy for the hospital.
The idea of using taxes for municipal services was still a new, and for many, uncomfortable idea. Like many initiatives and causes during the early 1900s, maintaining a hospital would come down to charity. For Bureau County, charity would come from a woman in Malden.
Public support for all kinds of philanthropies was really high in the early 20th century. You saw the construction of the public library, the construction of the Soldiers and Sailors Memorial. One of the terms that was coined back then was this culture on the prairie. And that was a term that it was lawyers and poets and physicians and, people of all these high class trainings. And they wanted to show basically the old colonial United States that we had education and refinements out here in what was the Wild West of Illinois at the time.
Julia Rackley was born on June 7, 1858. Her parents had been raised in Bureau County by some of the earliest and hardiest settlers in the area. Her grandmother had a reputation for fighting off prairie wolves with an axe. Julia Rackley married a gentleman named Jesse A. Perry in 1877. He operated the Perry Brothers Mercantile Shop in Malden. Together, Julia and Jesse had one son named George Nathan Perry. He died suddenly at the age of 9. According to family friends, the tragedy left Julia and Jesse with an unusual tenderness for humanity. Julia devoted her life to her home and her church. She was regarded as a woman of strong personality and generous spirit. During the final weeks of her life, Julia received more than 800 calls from friends and family. Her final years were not easy. Dr. Blackburn treated Julia for an unknown illness for more than 10 years. Twice, Dr. Blackburn had to put Julia through surgery. As the illness persisted, she and Jesse had to start thinking about what should be done with their fortune. They started having discussions with a lawyer, Caro A. Trimble, a prominent lawyer in Princeton and throughout Illinois. It was Mr. Trimble's suggestion that the Perrys donate their money to help the poor and sick of Bureau County. Julia and Jesse liked the idea. On December 28, 1913, Julia Rackley Perry finally succumbed to the disease that had plagued the last decade of her life. During the weeks following her death, the word of her generosity began to spread around the county. Her entire will was published in the Bureau County Tribune.
It has been my intention for many years to devote the larger part of my means to the advancement of the kingdom of God in the world. And as I approach the end of mortal life, having suffered much myself from physical ills, I am convinced that one of the most effective methods of accomplishing that end is to provide means to relieve others who may have suffering to endure.
Among other charitable donations, Julia bequeathed $25,000 to the city of Princeton for the sole purpose of constructing or endowing a public hospital in Princeton. The money was to be held in a trust, administered by her lawyer, Caro Trimble, along with Hubert Clark and Mabel Priestley. When Jesse died in 1915, the remainder of their assets were added to the trust. In all, more than $50,000 was gifted for the creation of the hospital. In modern terms, the Perry estate amounted to nearly $1.2 million. Julia's will included a requirement that the hospital be created within 5 years of her death. In April of 1916, the citizens of Princeton voted, by a great majority, in favor of a public hospital. Julia Rackley Perry Memorial Hospital was officially established by a city ordinance on May 29, 1916.
The advances in technology, I think, led to our municipal utilities coming about. So in the 1890s, they started with water and sewer, and those were health-related infrastructure projects. And so the fact that the city had gone into the business of sanitation sort of gave rise to this idea that maybe they would go into the business of medicine as well.
Caro Trimble was selected to manage every step of the project going forward. The first order of business was to find a location. In 1917, the old Princeton Hospital property was purchased for $4,711. The following year, Parker N. Berry was hired to create the architectural drawings. Berry was a graduate of Princeton High School. He made quick work of the designs, submitting updates on a weekly basis. By the summer of 1918, construction of the new hospital was about to begin, with the goal of opening on November 1st. The plans Parker Berry had made for the hospital included a 2-story building. It would sit in front of the old house, attached to it via an enclosed ramp. The hospital would have space for 5 babies and 28 patients, using a combination of wards and private rooms. Mr. Trimble and the other directors on the board had no idea how unrealistic November 1st would be. Worldwide events were starting to have an impact on everyone. America had entered World War I in 1917. Both supplies and transportation became limited very quickly. The demands of the war also made supplies far more expensive. The community was asked to raise an additional $10,000 to complete the construction process as costs grew far beyond the budget. On top of that, the Spanish flu was claiming lives of soldiers on the battlefield and citizens at home. One casualty was Parker Berry. As he neared the end of the drawings for the new Perry Memorial Hospital, Berry came down with the flu and died from pneumonia a few days later. Between the fear of the flu and the needs of wounded soldiers returning from Europe, the construction of Perry Memorial Hospital was, for many, seen as a patriotic duty. After 20 months of delays, Julia Rackley Perry's vision was realized on June 17, 1920, when the doors finally opened. As the public began to visit the hospital, it became apparent that much was still needed to make it complete. A request went out to the community for assistance, and people responded with everything from furniture, pillows, and flowers to live chickens. Like the original hospital, the new public version had the latest equipment and facilities, which left little room in the budget for comfort. The Women's Auxiliary went to work making and mending curtains, bed linens, towels, gowns, and all related supplies. The owner of the Apollo Theater donated a day's worth of ticket sales from its live theater production. Those funds, combined with a door-to-door fund drive, raised more than $3,000 to purchase needed supplies and equipment and hire additional nurses. Within the first 2 weeks of opening, Perry Memorial Hospital had 32 admissions. Before long, word would begin to spread. Nursing Superintendent Catherine Pond was managing the hospital well, earning it a positive reputation. At the same time, society was becoming more mobile, more wealthy, and more health conscious. It would not take long for the new hospital to become overwhelmed.